Hello, Laziali all over the world. Welcome to another emergency podcast. We are getting used to this emergency podcast, guys. I'm sorry, but this is leaving as a Lazio fan, right? Alasdair McKenzie, another emergency podcast. Well, I mean, you could expect this. After the emergency podcast for Tudor leaving the club, you know that sooner or later we had to sign a new manager, right, Alasdair? So you could see this coming.
Well, you say that, but I wouldn't have been that surprised if Lotito had just decided to do it himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. He said, I saw this interview where he said about Tudor, people are congratulating him for qualifying for the Europa League, but I've done that 15 times or whatever it was. It's like, you haven't. You're not the coach. You can't claim responsibility for that. So, yeah, maybe he does want to do the job. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe after the Baroni experience, he's gonna try himself. But yeah, Alasdair. Now, Marco Baroni has been announced yesterday. 2 years of contract. There were rumors about an option for the third. It doesn't look like it is in. A lot of surprise, to be honest with you, because there were a lot of managers available. I mean, Maurizio Sarri is still there. He's still been under contract till, he's got other 12, 18 days with Lazio. Max Allegri was linked to Lazio. I think that was pretty much impossible due to his huge salary. But you had the Zerbi, you had Italiano, you had Palladino. Why Marco Baroni, who is not a young manager, it's not a rising manager. He's turning 61, and in 20 years, give or take, of management, he never managed a team in the top medium level of Serie A. So that was a huge surprise, at least for me. Not a lot of Lazio fans are happy about this decision from Lazio. What's your take?
Well, I think there are two different things going on here that we need to discuss. One of them is the appointment of Marco Baroni itself as a coach, as a strategic decision, and the other side of it is why that has caused such outrage and what that means in terms of protests against the ownership and a renewed frustration about Lotito, which has been there for a long time, but has kind of exploded all over again. So if we start with the Baroni stuff, it is worth explaining to people, if in case they don't already know, that basically the reason he's been able to get the job is that he has just had a very good season with Verona, where they looked destined for relegation, and then in January basically changed their entire squad. I mean, they sold, I can't remember exactly how many players were sold and were signed, but they had this huge upheaval in the middle of the season.
11, if I'm not wrong.
It was mad, yeah. And made some really good signings, and Baroni managed to keep them in Serie A, which was a great achievement and was something that he got a lot of plaudits for. And that is essentially why, I guess, right now he had enough momentum behind him to be offered a job like Lazio. I think I'm just outlining that is the reason this has happened. When people are saying he's had 20 years in Serie B and Serie C and he's come and he's nothing, he's not nothing. He has just had a good season. That's why this has happened. That is worth acknowledging.
Well, can we say he had one good season? I would say two good seasons. Even with Lecce, he had a good season in 20 years. But good season for Baroni is not getting relegated, which I hope is not the goal of Lazio next season. But what I'm concerned most is something you said. Verona sold like 11 players this January, and Baroni didn't say nothing about it. To give a little bit of context, the owner of Verona, Setti, was in big financial issue and sold a lot of players, Ngonge to Napoli for 25 million euros, something like that, to make cash, basically, and keep the club alive, and sign youngsters paying much less than the money they made. So the issue a lot of Lazio fans have, he had Sarri who asked Lotito to buy certain player, top level players. Then he had Tudor coming and said, okay, you have to get rid of all these type of players. And Lotito said, wait a minute, I don't want to do it. And said to Fabiani, hey, go and get me a manager who doesn't complain about selling players or not buying top players. He said, hey, there's Baroni who just did it. Okay, good. Let's get Baroni. Because you could say there's Palladino, who had a very good season with Monza, who's a uprising manager. There's Italiano, who I don't like particularly, but if the option is Baroni or Italiano, I would think 99% of the people would side Italiano. So this is my biggest concern. Sarri, Lotito did it just because he was annoyed from managers demanding, sign me this, sell me that, etc. And we're looking, right? Fabiani is doing the transfer market pretty much on his own without anybody, without talking to the manager.
Yeah. And this is where the problems start to come in. The thing is, there's nothing wrong by itself with a manager who's going to get on with things and who is going to take the squad he's got and make the best of it, and who's not going to cause problems behind the scenes. We have seen all sorts of issues happen in recent seasons with Tudor and with Sarri, and the tension between him and Iglitare, and even previously a little bit with Inzaghi as well, and shouting on the phone with Lotito and so on. So that not having that kind of tension in the background and having someone who's willing to get on with it isn't necessarily a bad thing independently. The problem here is that then means we have to rely on and trust the club to do this by themselves. Yeah, head in hands moment. And the thing is, if you've got a coach like Marco Baroni, who's not going to say anything and who's going to take the squad and play his football, that's fine. But that's fine if you've got a Beppe Marotta or a Sartori or a Giuntoli or one of these sporting directors who have a proven track records of building squads, of getting great deals, of spotting opportunities, of seeing where holes need filled in the squads. There are some real masters of that in Italy. Sartori is probably the best example this season with Bologna, but there's quite a few examples of that. Fabiani isn't one of those guys. He's only very recently become a sporting director at Lazio in the first place. So we're basically not just entrusting the squad to a coach who's got very limited experience at this level, but we're giving that coach a sporting director and transfer strategy that is very inexperienced at this level as well. So that probably, Vittorio, in a nutshell, is why people are rapidly losing faith in this before it started, right? It's not just about Baroni.
Yeah, because, my point of view is the manager is important, right? He picks the starting 11, he makes the substitution, he does training, etc. But the players are the one entering the pitch and playing. So, you can have even Pep Guardiola, but if he's managing Leeds United or Ross County, he won't never win the Champions League, right?
Oh, I'd love to see
that. Well, I would argue that they first have to qualify for the Champions League. But so it's important to see who's going to sign Lazio. By the way, how you pronounce Sartori, it's amazing. I think we should start doing the podcast in Italian. Your Italian accent is better than my English one. So it's unbelievable. It makes me laugh all the time. But, it's not only Baroni arriving. Last night, we had the announcement of Luis Alberto leaving, and Felipe Anderson left, Kamada left. Now we have even Luis Alberto leaving. Probably the best 3 players of the club. Quality-wise, I'm talking about. You lost a lot of quality. And, even with Allegri or Palladino or Italiano, this issue was still there. Now you have to find the right players to replace them. And Fabiani, because you mentioned it, talked about we have to copy what Feyenoord did. Well, I don't think Feyenoord would ever sign a manager like Baroni. They're going for youngsters, but you have to sign quality youngsters, right? Because even with Guardiola, without Luis Alberto, etc., every manager would struggle with these players available now.
Yeah, but I think it's important that people see the full picture, isn't it? Because I'm not opposed to Baroni, as in I'm more than willing to support him and give him a fair chance. And I think he could prove people wrong a little bit, considering how the low level he's starting from. But so these protests shouldn't be misunderstood as directly opposition to Baroni. Baroni himself isn't the guy that everyone's furious with. It's more Lotito, Fabiani, and the general running of the club. And especially in the context of this coming after a period of real success, it has to be said, after some difficult years, Lazio kind of getting back into a position where they're competing to win, the Coppa Italia, the Supercoppa, or qualifying for the Champions League and reaching the last 16. And the thing we've spoken about over and over again is that the real next step the club needs to take is to be able to qualify for the Champions League in consecutive seasons, which is something they continuously fail to do. And a big part of that has been the lack of a kind of consistency there with the planning, with both the coaching and the transfer strategy and so on. And now when it comes to a coach like Baroni with the support of a sporting director like Fabiani, you are left feeling like this club is not being as ambitious as it should be. And I think the lack of ambition is probably one of the things that's frustrated people the most. And probably, Vittorio, the only way to claw this back is to actually make some ambitious signings to make up for it. But it doesn't sound like that's what's happening. And if you consider the Felipe Anderson, we'll talk about Luis Alberto later on. In the space of a year, we've lost Maurizio Sarri, Luis Alberto, Sergei Milinkovic-Savic, and Felipe Anderson. There has been so much quality, both in coaching and in players, that has gone, and we're left with shopping around teams who have either been relegated or just avoided relegation to try and build a team for next season.
Which is not in all the case a bad thing, right? Ederson for Atalanta arrived from Salernitana, and he has been an incredible signing. Now there are rumors that Manchester United could sign him for 40, 50 million euros, which, I mean, it's a good sale for Atalanta. But the problem is you lost a lot of quality. Are we sure that Noslin, that is the player linked to Lazio from Verona, has the same quality that Luis Alberto had? Chauna, who's another player who should be a new Lazio player in the coming days, arrived from Salernitana. He's interesting. I think he's a nice signing for Lazio. He has speed, quality, physique. That it's something Lazio have been lacking this year. So, I mean, it's not that if you sign players from a Salernitana or relegated team, it's always bad. But, the fans need to dream. I mean, part of being a supporter is dreaming big, right? And, if you sign only players from Salernitana, Frosinone, etc., it's hard to dream Lazio finishing in the top four. Sometimes you have to go and, sign a big player or at least, when last summer we signed Kamada, fans were really happy, were really exciting. Then, things didn't turn out pretty as expected, but you gave the fans a dream of Lazio finishing again in the top four. So that's probably the biggest problem. I mean,
but that was also because of Sarri, wasn't it? And the belief in that coach, in that project.
But even because Sarri was pushing for big signing, he knew we needed big players, because you were mentioning before, Lazio never ever finished 2 seasons in a row in the Champions League, and that has to do with the players. Probably after a good season, they relax. They don't feel the motivation to push harder again, and maybe signing big players that will fix the issue. Now we are looking to sign a lot of youngsters, which makes sense because it's a very old team. But I mean, you have to sign, if possible, good young players, not only young players. And that's where the issue is. In particular, because, and I want to ask you this, you're not concerned that in 20 years of management, Baroni only managed team that was fighting for relegation? Do you think there is a gap between those team and Lazio, or do you think he won't feel it?
Absolutely, there's a gap. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge step up for him. And it's not the appointment I would have made. When I said I'm going to support Baroni, it's because he's who we've got now. I don't want to start the new season contesting a guy who's yet to prove himself, who's not done anything wrong. It's not his fault he's been appointed. Of course, he's going to take the job, you know. But yeah, of course, I've got doubts about that. I mean, it's usually we were talking about this last time. Usually you take the step from the kind of job he's done into maybe like a Torino or a Genoa or something, like a mid-ranking Serie A club, to prove yourself there before you have a crack at the top. So I would have liked to see more ambition. I would have liked to see the club take more time over it. That's the thing I said last week. You know, there's no immediate hurry, and they did. I know it's taken a while for this to be made official, but they made the decision on this almost immediately. They didn't seem to stop and think about it in the same way they didn't stop and think about Tudor. And that's frustrating. It's such a clear example of how badly planned everything seems to be, because with Tudor, you know, Lotito's now been complaining about how Tudor wanted to sign all these players and change the team. Of course he did. You don't need to just Google him and you can tell that Tudor was going to need to change that team. That team, we said from day one, it wasn't suited to his style of football. You were always going to have to make big changes to that squad as soon as you appointed him. So I don't understand how you can possibly complain about that. It's just such a lack of foresight.
I mean, if even Alasdair McKenzie could understand that Tudor needed to change a lot of players, everybody could, right? So, I mean, Lotito couldn't be surprised for that. It's a very old team as well. So, you know, that's another very important fact. The other thing I want to add, Alasdair, you said Lazio was in a rush to sign Baroni, which didn't make sense as he's not making the transfer market. It's Fabiani deciding on his own. So it's not that you said, hey, I need a new manager because he has to give me the inputs to the players I want to sign. No, pretty much it's Fabiani signing players and then calling Baroni and said, hey, I signed this player, okay? And that's it. So, this is another problem. I can understand that Lotito doesn't want any more managers say, hey, sign me Berardi, hey, sign me Zelinski. But at the same time, we don't have to go back to the Inzaghi era where Tare was signing wingers and Inzaghi was playing with a 3-5-2, so didn't need wingers, right? Because that's an issue. That turned out to be a problem. We had Durmisi, we had Johnny, we had Adekania, players that was useless for Inzaghi. And, you know, we couldn't sign other players because we had to get rid of these ones that were pretty much useless for us.
We had Pedro Neto. What happened to him? I mean,
he's in the Portugal national team.
Absolutely tearing it up with Wolves. I mean, I think this is it. It's Lotito. If he's that bothered by being bothered, then don't run a football team. Like, it seems like he's had enough of people complaining to him about wanting stuff. I'm sorry, but that's what owning an elite football club. You're gonna have to deal with that kind of pressure. I know he's got a lot of other stuff on his plate. Perhaps he's just finding it an annoyance, and he wants Lazio to just run in the background. But this is a big part of the reason we should probably get on to talking about this, why these protests have been planned, which isn't something new. You know, the anti-Lotito protests have been going on ever since he joined the club, really. But they tend to kind of quieten down and then flare up every now and then.
Well,
this time it sounds like it's going to be a big one, Vittorio. Do you want to explain what's going on?
Yeah, well, I think it's based on results, right? You couldn't complain of the owner when you finish second in the league. Obviously, when you finish seventh, things change. So the protest will be at the Stadio Flaminio, Curva Nord of Stadio Flaminio, which I don't remember which side of it it's going to be, but I'm going to find out. 6:30, if you're in Rome and want to join, Lazio fans are going to meet outside the Flaminio, the Curva Nord of Stadio Flaminio at 6:30 with a Lazio shirt, just like this one, a flag if you have it. And I guess we're going to be there to protest against Lotito and his way of managing the club, which is embarrassing. We said it so often, Alasdair. Lazio has been the only team playing in the Champions League without a sponsor on the shirt. So there are a lot of reasons why we should protest against Lotito. I hope it's going to be a pacific, peaceful protest. And honestly, I don't know if anything is going to change, to be honest with you. But I think it's a sign of the fans that are not very happy. One thing we have to mention, Alasdair, the season ticket will be postponed. This because fans are not very happy. You lost Tudor, you're signing Baroni, you lost Luis Alberto, maybe Ciremobile, Luis Alberto, Felipe Anderson, Kamada. You pretty much didn't sign nobody. So signing the season ticket now, I think nobody will renew the ticket. So this is another sign of the frustration of the fans, right?
Yeah, but you touched on a good point there, which is that realistically it is unlikely to change much because Lotito has been around for 20 odd years now, and he has dealt with protests time and again. He's spoken about this all the time. Every time he's pressed on a potential sale of the club, he'll say that the club's going to be passed to his son. I mean, this week was a bit too far. He got asked about if there was an offer from like basically a sheikh to buy the club for 600 million. Would he take it? And he said it's worth double that, which is just blatantly not true. But it kind of tells you what how stubborn he is and how impossible it is really to get rid of him. And this is why I guess the fans are so frustrated. So, I mean, I'm all for, protesting his ownership because I think it's been so poor. But the reality is it's unlikely to change much, sadly.
Well, if someone of our listener is a very, very, very rich man or knows someone who's very rich and wants to enter the Italian football, guys, now is your moment. Step up and contact Claudio Lotito and see if he's willing to sell the club. I mean, this would be the perfect moment. I think the fans will be all backing you. So it's time for a change, Alasdair. 20 years of Lotito. We've reached the qualification in the Champions League only 4 times. So it's time we have listeners all over the world, even if we still have Alasdair on a podcast. So if there's a rich man, a big company who's watching this podcast and want to buy Lazio, I mean, if you need help, we're here. We can help you get in touch, help you starting promotion, right? And start the campaign.
Just need 1.2 billion euros.
Yeah, just to give a little bit of context, Football Benchmark, that is a private agency, did 2 weeks ago, I think, the valuation of all the top 30 clubs. And I think Lazio was valued 475 million euros, and Milan and Inter was 1.4 billion. So for Lotito, we are at the same level of Milan and Inter, which is absolutely not true. For Football Benchmark, we are 450, 500 if you want to exaggerate. So this tells you how crazy. And he said that only talking about properties, Lazio has 250 million euros of property value, which I really don't understand because we have pretty much only Formello and a building in Rome. I don't think that's worth 150 million, to be honest with you.
No, and I guess this is part of the reason why the protest is at the Flaminio, because it's quite it's a symbolic place that shows the inaction on Lotito's part to actually do something about something that's been talked about for so long, and that we don't really need to go into again here because we've done several podcasts already about the study of Flaminio, but it's still sitting there with nothing happening, just lots of words and words and words and words. And I guess that makes sense. Should we talk about Luis Alberto before we finish? Because
I mean,
or have you got something else to add before we move on?
No. I mean, talking about Luis Alberto, this was something we all were aware, right? We knew that Luis Alberto wanted to leave. We thought he was going to Spain. Instead, he's decided to accept an incredible offer, 8 million euros salary for Luis Alberto for the next 3 years. Lazio got something like 10 million euros. So that's not what we were hoping for, but still good money for a 32 years old player. But he leaves a huge gap, right, Alasdair?
Yeah, and I do think it's worth taking a moment to appreciate everything that Luis Alberto has done for the club. I think he's been one of the best signings that the club's made this century, probably. I mean, if you think about, I can't remember exactly the fee, but I think it was something like 4 or 5 million euros, wasn't it?
5 million euros plus 30% of revenue on an Excel for Liverpool.
So for him to spend 8 years with Lazio and then leave for a profit, it's pretty incredible by itself. If you think about everything he's done in that time, and he's been an absolute core member of this squad, brought a real kind of touch of class, creativity, just vision, just what the touch. I mean, everything. He's been a delightful player to watch, an archetypal number 10, really. He maybe hasn't been as loved as a player like Milinkovic-Savic was due to his occasional, I say occasional, pretty frequent, to be honest, kind of mess ups with various things he would say and do. But just because he's had a pretty poor season and he's left after that very controversial interview where he said he wanted out, I don't think we should avoid paying proper tribute to him because he's been an incredible Lazio player.
No, definitely. I mean, one of the keys of last season's success, right? The second place was even thanks to Luis Alberto. Obviously, as you were mentioning, incredible talent, probably one of the best trequartista in the Serie A in the last 5 years, but very difficult to cope outside the pitch, I would say. His behavior, let's not forget that this summer, not 10 years ago, this summer, he didn't show up because he wanted a new contract. And then after 8 months, he wanted to leave. So very difficult to cope with. Let's not forget the time where he was streaming on Twitch and said that Lotito was more interested in buy aeroplanes rather than play the salary of the players. So, I mean, there are a lot of incredible things that Luis Alberto did in and out the pitch. Obviously, his talent was unbelievable, off the charts, I would say. And it's going to be very, very, very difficult to replace him. His quality, it's unbelievable. Now, can we find a replacement? Because the quality of this team has dropped massively. Not only Felipe Anderson and Kamada, but Luis Alberto is a huge loss now. 32 years old, he's getting older. He wasn't able to play every single game. His form wasn't consistent, but still great quality. So it's not gonna be easy to replace him. But I think it was time. No, I think it was overdue. We should have sold him 2 years ago and probably would have made 30 million, 40 million euros for the player.
It's amazing to think, looking back, that his first season was a bit of a disaster, wasn't it? There wasn't really a particular role for him. I think he was playing out on the wing a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And then it was really at Alonso, I think, where he was kind of found a new position. And from there, he easily could have gone after a year.
Yeah, there's the usual miscommunication, right? We're playing 4-3-3 and you sign a trequartista. So it was difficult to place him in a scheme, right, where he didn't fit. So Inzaghi had to adapt to Luis Alberto. But yeah, I think Inzaghi had a very good idea of where to place him and the results were immediate. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just to go back to a point of from earlier, though, like with him going, Anderson going, Milinkovic gone, it is a real kind of changing of the guards. You know, that core of this team was central to success that has happened. I guess the kind of development and growth we've seen in recent years, and Immobile is a part of that as well. And okay, he's still with the club, but this season has shown signs that he is finally kind of on the wane and perhaps not the player anymore that he was. So it's going to be really difficult. I mean, Iglitare was on fire back then. You know, he made he really made his name in that period with the signings he was making. Not just those guys I mentioned, but even if you think about guys like Stefan de Vrij and Lucas Bilia, and you got a lot of great pickups in that period. So Fabiani has to prove himself. I mean, he has got any number of critics already, which perhaps isn't fair because he's not been in the job very long, but he has to deliver a big mercato if we're going to stay at a level and not remain down in, you know, 7th and outside Champions League places.
Yep, I think you're perfectly right. And it was funny to see at the Luis Alberto wedding, Iglitare and not Ciro Immobile. I don't know if there's something behind the scene that we don't know. But yeah, I was surprised to see Iglitare there. I mean, it looks like they have a very good relationship. But I think we can wrap it up here, Alasdair. It was a very long emergency podcast. I hope it's going to be the last one of this summer, but with Lazio, you never, ever, ever know. So, I mean, maybe Fabiani's going to retire or get sacked in the next week. Who knows? Or Lotito's going to sell the club. We still hope for that, but it's going to be very difficult. Again, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks, Alasdair, for joining me. And we're going to be back as soon as possible, maybe after the first signing of Lazio.
All right. Cheers.
Take care. Ciao, ciao.